Right, a very, very good morning and welcome to the very first Brixton Housing Co-op online how-to. And today's how-to is how to write minutes and write reports. So it's how to take minutes and how to write reports. And a very good morning, Angelica. I'm glad that you're joining us for today's how-to session. Can I just ask, Angelica, for people who don't know you, what's made you interested in today's how-to around minute taking and writing reports?
Yeah. Well, first, hello, everybody who is watching this. And I'm probably not the best example because I find minute taking really difficult. And I mean, I have got a bit better at it, but that's why I'm coming to this session. Because to learn how to get better at it.
Yes. And so it sounds like in the past you have taken minutes for various committees. Well, which committees have you taken minutes?
No, I mean, it's just a year ago I joined the finance committee, and in collaboration with another co-op member, we write the minutes together, and we kind of then yes, so which is wonderful to do it together rather on my own. But I must say the other person is the driving force in it.
So for you, is it today about getting just better and more confident with minute taking?
Yes, yes.
And then Angelica, we're going to touch on then afterward writing articles and so on, because sometimes people might want to write articles, be it for the newsletter or other things. Tell me, have you ever had experience of that, or is that something interesting? I'm just curious about that.
It's also a challenge. I mean, I feel I've got into a phase now where I'm going for challenges, things I've avoided nearly all my life.
That's amazing.
Now it's my time. So anything to do with writing, I feel quite nervous about. Okay. But I also know it's a really good skill to learn and to have and use. So, and I mean, the nice thing is I feel safe enough in the co-op setup to do that, to learn that.
Wonderful. You know, what you're saying here, Angelica, is gold dust, because I think the whole idea of this particular how-to is to help people, be it that they've written minutes before, or they've never, or they thought, oh, it would be good for me to do something in a committee, that they could write minutes. And it's something, these skills that we can be covering today will be useful if somebody's writing minutes in the co-op, or maybe they're involved in any other kind of group, or there might be something else that they're doing, or let's say if they're working, or perhaps they might even be self-employed. And also the same thing about writing articles. So it's useful within the co-op, but in any context. So what we're about to do, Angelica, is that we're now going to try a little bit more of technology. I'm going to be sharing my screen with you and everybody who's watching. So I'm going to pull up a set of slides for us to go through. And Angelica, at any time, feel free to ask any questions. We'll have a conversation about it, just as we would do in the in-person ones. And you've got, I can see you're prepared. You've got a pen and paper.
Yes, I have.
And again, anyone who's at home, you can pause this and grab yourself a pen and paper. So I'm just about to share my screen now. So everybody, I'm about to share my screen, and you will soon be able to see my screen come up. And now I'm about to pull up the slides for taking minutes. So in a second, this will be able for us to see, and I'm gonna start from the start. So hopefully, Angelica, can you see the slides for today's session?
Yes, very clearly, and brilliant that one can do it.
Wonderful.
I like Zoom.
It's lovely. Yeah, Zoom, this is fantastic. So we've talked a little bit about today, and you've talked a little bit about how you're on the finance committee. And so you've said also in terms of this point number 3 here, for you today's about, I get the feeling, just being more comfortable about it, learning that new skill. Is that right?
Yes.
Okay, let's begin then. So I think that for anybody who's taking minutes, I just put this first slide up just to help people be aware of the co-op, because it might be that somebody's either very experienced with the co-op or new to the co-op. So knowing a little bit about the co-op really helps. Otherwise we can find myself thrown into a meeting and not knowing that much about the co-op. I remember when I first joined the co-op many years ago now, and I joined maintenance committee. And I didn't really know that much about the co-op. So for me, knowing a little bit of the history of the co-op might have probably helped me a little bit. So this slide just says, you know, we're founded in 1976, we're housing under tenant control, particularly for those people who are single, who weren't being housed by Lambeth Council. And it's self-managed and so on, so that we're autonomous. So that just gives a little bit of the context of this amazing housing co-op. And the other thing that also puts this in context is that we're guided by these 7 cooperative principles, which I think are universal cooperative principles about being voluntary and open, democratic, so we all have a say. We all have an economic stake. We all put our £1 in membership share. There's independence and education information. So that's a key part. So what we're doing today is an important part of that, because otherwise, without the education, we wouldn't be able to continue to run. We need to, as you were saying before, constantly learn. Cooperation among each other and concern for our community. Now, interestingly, here, Angelica, is the definition of minutes. Now, the Cambridge Dictionary says it's the written record of what was said at a meeting. So technically that's it. So let's say you and I have attended a meeting in person or online, and our minutes, our written record of that particular meeting. Then it's interesting, I put one other definition here, because when I looked this definition up, I thought, well, that's fine, but it doesn't tell me a little bit more. And then here's what Business Dictionary says. It says it's a permanent, formal, and detailed, or though not verbatim record. And I can see already you're intrigued by this. Angelica, any thoughts already about this record? So it's a permanent, formal, and detailed record of the business transacted, resolutions adopted at a firm's meeting, or of course it could be a co-op or anywhere, such as a board of directors, managers, or an annual general meeting. Once written up or typed in a minute book, it is approved at the next meeting, and the minutes are then accepted as a true representation of the proceedings, and then they can be used as this looks like it's a Latin word. It's evidence of the matters. In other words, we have a meeting, they're typed up or they're written up, and then at the following meeting, people read them through and check that they were a record, an accurate record, although not word by word, not verbatim, of that meeting, be it an annual general meeting, any type of meeting, a co-op meeting, any meeting. Does that kind of make sense, Angelica?
Yes.
And I guess the thing that jumps out to me about this is that maybe that's what puts pressure on people a little bit. Okay, I'm taking minutes. Oh, it's got to be right. It's got to be accurate. Have I got to get every single word? Tell me, what's been your experience of this? Have you found it easy, or have you found it kind of challenging? Because often in a meeting, there's all sorts of things going on, isn't there? So the idea for the minute taker of capturing the key points can be daunting. What's been your experience of that?
As I say, it's a real challenge for me, and it's the difficulty for me is to keep up the pace, because, you know, I mean, all these, you know, kind of, oh gosh, now I'm getting really nervous already thinking about it. You know, our committees are really busy, you know, so lots of points to go through. Yes. And usually I'm with it, you know, for half an hour, and then I start losing it gradually.
I think what you're saying, Angelica, will really resonate with so many people. It can be exactly that. You're there, the meetings can be busy, a committee like finance or management, maintenance, and particularly a membership, particularly those committees or development now. There's often so many different points being discussed, and often different people have different amounts of knowledge about it. So keeping up, being aware of all the points being discussed, and for the minute taker, capturing them in an accurate way, albeit not word by word, can be very, very daunting. And some of these meetings can be quite lengthy with all sorts of different issues, and some of them can seem kind of technical as well. So I think you're not alone in that. So I think what we'll do is that we'll move on to some basic, some real simple tips that will just help us to do that. The first thing to say is that I want to share, particularly with people who perhaps, Angelica, are newer to minute taking, some of the key features of minutes. Typically, your minutes will include the list of attendees, the apologies, people who aren't able to attend, who should have sent their apologies hopefully in advance, a conflict of interest declarations. In other words, people get an opportunity to say, has something come up where they've got a conflict of interest? It might be something to do with housing, but I'm a neighbour, so I've got to say, actually, I've got a conflict of interest because I know that particular person or I've been involved in that. Then typically it will go through the matters arising. In other words, are there any issues, actions, or updates from the last meeting that need to be checked on? And so as we can see here, there's a sample version of a set of minutes that begins in exactly that way. It has a list of the attendees, list of the people of apologies, and the minutes from the last meeting were then agreed. And it doesn't have conflict of interest in that one. Oh yeah, it does. It has a conflict of interest that I think it says here, that somebody declared a conflict of interest. Mm. That was a historic meeting. So that's a classic way that a meeting might begin. And then the minutes typically will have then relevant subheadings that relate to that committee. So in other words, it might well be, I'm trying to think of an example. I currently sit on the communications subcommittee. So our subheadings might be member engagement, newsletter, website, and so on are our regular things, and then items that will go to our management committee. Does that make sense to you? Is your meeting similar?
Oh, yeah.
And then typically the features will also include actions. What are the actions to be taken? Now, different minute takers and different meetings will have different style. Interestingly, our management committee, and I think other committees too, tend to have their actions in, I think they have it in boxes. They have an additional sheet that will have boxes. Whereas in my committee, this one is from communications, our actions are in bold. So it's easy to see.
Right,
But there's no, it's what works for the committee. And then typically we'll include the date and the venue of the next meeting. Some things to note that we put down here is, are there any supporting papers? There might be other reports. Who should write and keep the minutes? It's lovely how in your committee, for example, there are 2 minute takers who share the load. This is an interesting one. In the co-op, what should happen technically is that the minute takers should keep the minutes. They should be circulated to everybody in the committee, and they should be sent to the office where the housing manager, so Glenda at the moment, would look after and file all of those so there's an accurate record. And we've now introduced a folder in the meeting room where, oh no, not of minutes, actually the minutes are the one thing that aren't kept in there, but they're kept, they will be kept in the office so anybody could ask to see the minutes. And that's really important, isn't it, for, as it says here, for transparency. It says here, the last bullet point here says, what should and shouldn't be included? Be mindful of ethics, transparency, accountability, paper trail, privacy and data protection. So for example, many minute takers will, in some committees, like for example, the maintenance committee, if an item comes up that relates to a particular tenant, they will relate to it, they will refer to the house, not the actual tenant. So they might say, house number B, blah, 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 road. In other words, that we're able to look at that issue without naming that particular tenant. So those things are worth bearing in mind. Do those issues come up in your own committee and in terms of minute taking? I'm just curious to ask about that, Angelica.
You know, you see, I drifted off just now thinking, oh, have I got, so what did you say? The last
so I was just saying that one of the things about minute taking that can be interesting is that it can be interesting issues about ethics, transparency, accountability, and the paper trail. So I was saying, for example, so all of our minutes are filed, you know, they're sent to everyone in the committees and they're kept in the office on record. But interestingly, for example, with our minutes, We don't keep them on, for example, our website, because some of the things will be private and so on, and they're shared just within the committee. I was also saying that one of the things that some committees do, for example, maintenance, which I used to sit on, when they refer to certain items, they will refer to the house number, not the tenant's name. So they might.
Oh yeah. Oh, now I know what you mean. No, I mean we keep complete privacy, and you know, for instance, because we deal with rent arrears, and you know, so instead of the names of the tenants, we do have numbers. So the none of the finance committee, you know, kind of know who the tenants are.
That's really brilliant. That's excellent, good practice. But as you can see, so these are some of the things for us to almost think about before minute taking. So one of my tips here, if somebody, Angelica, was coming in new for the first time to minute take, I would always recommend that they would sit with or chat with someone like yourself who had taken minutes before, and the chair, so they can become familiar with the committee and with the process, so that we don't throw people into the deep end with minute taking, because there's a lot to it. So I'm going to flick onto the next slide. So here are some of my top tips for minute takers. And this is my top, here are my top tips for minute takers. So before and between meetings, plan, prepare, read up, get to know the chair, the committee, the roles and so on, you know, everybody, because getting to know people will help you just get a bit of an energy of the meeting, the people, the stuff that they discuss. So I would say this is a tip for anybody joining committee. Get to know people, chat to them, arrive early so you can get to know and ask questions. Don't be afraid to ask questions. We run a separate how-to, and which I think you've attended, Angelica, on chairing and attending meetings, where we'll go into this stuff in more detail, just to help people to become more comfortable about the whole process about attending a meeting or chairing it. But broadly, here are our top 10 tips. Arrive early, prepare yourself the papers, have a good seat, because as a minute taker, you want to feel as though you've arrived on time, you pick the chair where you feel most comfortable. I quite like to sit next to the chair when I'm minute taking, just in case there's any things they're saying and so on. What's your thoughts on this, Angelica? Do you do the same? Do you like to arrive?
Yeah, it's always good to sit close to the chair.
Yeah.
Because then it's also, I mean, I know, because I'm sometimes don't get what it's about or something, then, you know, I can't get. And the chair, you know, kind of helps me in wording it. So
that's absolutely brilliant, and we're going to come on to that exact point. So arriving early, have the papers ready. Now, different committees work differently. Technically, I was told historically in the past, we'd often have a role which was actually called the secretary, which was a bit more of an involved role. So you weren't just taking the minutes, you'll be preparing the papers, circulating them around. Different committees work differently. Management, where there's so much paperwork, the office manager helps prepare the papers. And I think that's, and photocopies some of the papers and so on, which I think happens with a number of the committees. And in maintenance, I know that the maintenance worker prepares some of the paperwork in advance alongside the chair. And often the minute taker just takes the minutes. In my own committee, well, in communications committee, the committee I happen to sit on at the moment, I like to prepare the papers and circulate them, and then we have a separate minute taker who just takes minutes. So it's about what works best for that committee and given the workload. But I think the minute taker does need to be there early, ready. And my own tip is actually, different people are different. Some people like to write them. I like to type as I go, because otherwise if I was to write, I used to start off by writing the minutes. Then I found that it took me hours at home, whereas if I was able to type, do you do the same? Yeah, and then that would be a good tip. So then it says here, keep your minutes clear, succinct, and easy to follow. I think this is really important for you and for everybody. So my top tip here, Angelica, and I'd love your thoughts, is I like to write minutes, imagining that I'm writing the minutes for somebody who may not have been at the meeting, for somebody who might not know anything about the business. So keeping it nice and easy. And I loved what you said a few minutes ago, Angelica, about when you don't understand something, to ask the chair. Or I always would recommend, I'll sometimes pause the meeting and say, oh, can I just check the wording? And I think that's really important. And in fact, it says here, point number 4, check people's names, the spellings at the start and as you go along. You want to get that right. People often are sensitive about that. We want to get that right. So don't be shy about asking that. Ask questions if you aren't clear. Minutes must make sense. So it's really important to ask questions. Don't feel embarrassed. I think one of the most powerful things we can ever do is ask questions. How do you feel about that, Angelica?
I think it's really important because we have got co-op members who have been wonderfully, active for years. And, and so they're very knowledgeable, but that also creates a language in itself, which for new people is sometimes not understandable. And so I know, kind of Margot and I, we try to, kind of to write that everything makes sense to a newcomer or somebody who's not familiar about the finance committee.
That's so powerful, and especially with something like finance that can seem daunting. So again, Angelica, my feedback to you is so many things about good practice with minute taking you're mindful of and you're doing. And I think that for all of us, it's a journey. And I think for most people who take minutes, unless somebody happens to have a role, let's say in an organization, let's say where they are an executive PA, where they're going to have minute taking absolutely down pat. For most of us, where this is just one of the things we do, it requires that work. It's not easy, but the more we do it, we find it comfortable. We find our feet. So it's natural to feel that that it's a learning process. Point 7 is very similar, isn't it? Politely slow people down if they're going too fast. Don't be shy. I'm aware I'm somebody who speaks very fast, for example, so it's really important to encourage, as a minute taker, to see it as your role to slow people down. Can I just pause you there? Let me just capture that. Could you just say that again? I just need a moment to capture that in the minutes. I think that is essential, because the worst thing we can do is to have minutes and people make up the minutes or having to second guess, and then they come back next time and they're not an accurate reflection and nobody can quite remember the points that were discussed. And it's really important, isn't it, that our minutes, especially with so many of the committees, be it finance, management and so on, it's important we get it right. Somebody might have said, well, who was involved in a particular issue that was discussed, your minutes say that I had said X, Y, and Z when I actually said A, B, C. So it's really important that the minute taker takes that time. Point 8 is similar, I think, to what you said. Tricky issues, ask the chair to give precise wording to minutes. So I'll often ask when I'm minute taking, can you give me precise wording here? You were all talking about something quite complex. Can you give me the wording to minutes? Do you ever do that, Angelica? What's your thoughts?
Well, I mean, our chair is really good in that,
Yes.
kind of, then he is, I mean, that's the nice thing. He is helpful in, I mean, especially with me, kind of sometimes being a bit slow, kind of to repeat or to give the gist of matters.
Wonderful.
Yeah.
That's wonderful. And point 9, no actions, by whom, by when, and make sure they're visible. So as I said, in some minutes, people put them in bold like ours here. In other minutes, people will have a clear action thing, action by. Also, I'd say point 10, learn what works best for you. I should say, so when you see there's typing error there, it should say, is it like typing the minutes as you go or writing them? After the meetings, complete, spell check, proofread, do this as soon as you can. Circulate the minutes as soon as you can. This helps everyone. Keep learning, seek feedback, work with the chair to improve things. So here, imagine that in point number 10, I put a deliberate typo. It says egg typing, but it's easy. There will be typos. We're all human. So don't get I would say to anybody, don't get too caught up on it. We're human. Those things can be corrected afterwards. So don't overly worry. I'm not going to go into too much depth. There is a slide here on attending meetings, which we'll go into in the attending and chairing meetings that we've both been on, Angelica. But can I just ask you, is there anything else that you feel as a minute taker, anything else that you would say that you would give as advice to anybody who is a minute taker in a minute? Because they've got an interesting role, isn't it? They're attending the meeting, but yet they are actually probably first and foremost absorbed in the minute taking, and so they can't follow the meeting quite the same way as other people. Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think it's because we are really lucky at the moment. We have got, quite a few new members, kind of new people having come to join to see what's going on, and they might join the finance committee. So, and what I noticed is of the newcomers, well, I thought, oh, some, they are already experienced, kind of with doing something because they work in admin or something, and others not. And what I would suggest is do take your time before you, kind of not years, but, do take some time to get a sense of what's going on in the committee. And, because you have time to ask questions, and perhaps you could, with one finance, kind of committee member, ask if that person would be willing to answer questions, perhaps even outside the,
Brilliant advice.
Time.
Brilliant advice.
And then, kind of when you feel ready, or I mean, I've never been ready for it, but when you think, then go for it.
That's such wonderful advice, and I think also chairs should be on the lookout for people who they can get to do things. So that's absolutely right. That's absolutely right. Again, I'm not going to go into this in detail because we'll cover it about chairing in our special session. But as you said, Angelica, the point here is for people to spend time, get to know people, ask questions, find out about the different roles, because that will make you feel far more comfortable. And as you had said, Angelica, it's lovely. The chair should also has got a key role in helping support the minute taker, supporting everyone so that people feel involved in the whole meeting. What I'm going to do now is, before we go into writing reports, I'm going to stop the share here, and I'm just going to talk a little bit about some sample minutes. Now, Angelica, for the purpose of this, so here we are back again, it's just us.
Oh no, I'm really on the spot.
So Angelica,
I mean, get a bit of coffee.
What we're not going to be, what anybody who, grab your coffee. And I think for anybody who's not been on this call, you're not going to be able to see, I mean, I'm going to put up right here, but I'm not going to show it too much. But this is, for example, what a set of minutes look like. This is ones from communications. They're 2 pages. I always try and recommend for our committee, we're lucky that there isn't too much, usually that we can get it done in 2 pages. Where possible, try and keep the minutes fairly short. This is a set of minutes from maintenance from a number of years ago. Then this is minutes, similar style. I was the minute taker there, so this is kind of my own style of writing minutes. This is 3 pages in all. Management, if we were to see the management committee meetings, these are far more weighty because there will be supporting documents from each department, and so on. So there's quite a lot of text and so on. So different minutes look differently. One of my tips would be just take a little bit of time to look at different minutes, different types of minutes, to get a feel for different minutes and how they look, and find your own way. Angela, can I just ask you, what's your feeling from a minute taker's point of view on whether you feel it's best to have the same person regularly take minutes, or to rotate it, or as in the case of your committee, to share it, that we've got 2 people? Because it strikes me that you've got pros and cons from each of those. What's been your thoughts as a minute taker who shares the minutes about the benefits of that and disadvantages of that?
Well, as a struggling minute taker, I'm very glad, to do it with Margot, who, is experienced, and it's very, I'm losing the thread now, you see. Whenever I get nervous,
so can I ask a question then? So you share it. So how do you share
what
it?
do you want to know?
Yes, I'm keen to know, how do you actually share the minutes? Do you both work on them together, or does one person do it one week and the other person do it the next?
No, we do it, I mean, both of us do take the minutes during the session. And the good thing is, since, there's quite a lot going on, it's like when, Margot is very involved in the subject, I make sure to do the record. And then, kind of, when I lose it because my attention span has gone, then I say, are you writing, Margot? And she said, yeah. So, and when we meet, then we, each has got the notes and then we put it together.
You know what, Angelica, that's powerful. That's a lovely way of being cooperative. And I think particularly with something like finance or something that could be complex or that could work in management, that's a really good way. And in fact, for me, even as somebody who, as a separate from the stuff I do with the Co-op, as a coach and as a trainer, for me, what you've said is wonderfully innovative, of a great way of people sharing the load and working very effectively and to actually get really, really accurate minutes. It's a brilliant, brilliant way to do it. The other way of doing it is that if its stuff is fairly straightforward, the most classic way is there's one person who takes the minutes and they take the minutes all the time. So in our committee, it's the same person all the time. When I was on maintenance, I used to take them all the time. I quite like that because it's my role. I knew that's all I was doing, and then it's easy to follow through. My tip for any committee is if you just have your 1 minute taker, have somebody as a backup, because if that person's sick or what have you, you're suddenly thrown. So it's good. And this is why sessions like this are really important. So you've got somebody who's comfortable who can stand in. I think if suddenly things are changing, try and you pointed to this before, train somebody up. Don't just expect them to be able to pick up on minutes, and maybe get them to shadow you the first time, then you to do them jointly like you did last time. I like that, because otherwise I think being thrown into the deep end writing minutes, I'd imagine, Margot, this be difficult. I wouldn't wish that on most people. That would be really complicated, right? What are your thoughts on that?
What that is complicated, you're thrown into the deep end.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think, it's, kind of, we had an example in the co-op of, somebody new being enthusiastic and, kind of slipping into minute taking, basically. And it just was not a good experience, kind of. So, it's then you give up and you lose confidence and it's difficult then to get your feedback
Yeah, absolutely. So my tips would be, if you're new to it, ask for help, shadow somebody, chairs, train people up, point them toward things like this how-to, come along to when we resume the in-person how-tos, watch something like this, which is really, really great. So Angelica, we've done part 1 very nicely, and part 2 is going to be quite quick and easy.
Gosh, yeah.
Angelica, that was brilliant. Thank you so much. That was wonderful. So that's part 1 done. Yeah. Angelica, I'm going to let you have a nice sip of tea. And so, Angelica, we're about to move on, and everybody who's watching this, and we're going to move on and just briefly touch on something which is actually a little bit more fun to do, hopefully, which is writing articles, because writing minutes is very formulaic and it's a particular way, but then we might be writing articles. So we might be writing something for the newsletter, we might be writing something in our own lives. So Angelica, can I ask you, have you ever written articles, and what kind of things have you done?
The very few I've written, I spent hours and hours on, because of the lack of confidence, basically, and, the wording. And I mean, I'm German, so, it's not English, it's my second language. Yes. So, I mean, especially with writing, I'm very aware of it.
Right.
In comparison to talking, that I don't care. I just talk. So.
Oh, yeah. And I think you've said something very powerful. Well, you've just said something so powerful, because people like you and I, maybe our most natural style might be in the written, spoken word, because we're chatty, we're a people person, and that might be our far more natural one. And if you think about it, we learn to speak, don't we, before we learn to write. So writing is a slightly more complex skill and an art, isn't it, that we learn. Now, the interesting thing I want to say before we get deep into it, we're surrounded by writing and articles all the time. We get all sorts of journals, don't we? We might read newspapers and magazines. So in a way, we are quite used to articles. We're reading constantly from growing up, little magazines we might subscribe to. There are articles all over the place. You know what I
You
mean?
have got lots of magazines for sheets.
Yeah.
You love words. I can see that.
These are my samples for this thing. So the point and the reason for having this is just to remind us that actually, before you even begin to write, you probably know more about writing than you think, because we have from school been reading and writing. However, there are some simple things that might well help. And funny enough, I hold this up because funny enough, I first started my career, my first career, working for Which, where I worked in their press office, and I learned, my job was involved in writing articles and so on, but mainly writing press reports. So I learned some simple tips that I'm going to share with us for the purpose of this. And so again, I'm just about to share my screen once again for everybody, yourself, Angelica, and everybody who's watching this at home or from the comfort of where they are. So let's just flick through here. Let's just, oops, let me just do, can you see safely my screen? Okay.
Yeah.
So writing reports, just a few simple things first of all to say. So when you're writing any report, it might be something for the co-op because you've got to write a report for the newsletter for your committee. It might be that you might be wanting to write something in related to your work or some piece of research. The first thing to think, why are you writing and what is your goal? Are you writing, for example, to inform people about something that happened in committee? Are you writing to get people to be informed to volunteer? So yesterday, for example, we sent out a bulletin to the co-op to get people to volunteer to help during a current challenge that's going on. So that's where I think about what's the goal, what's the outcome? That's number one, is why. Then we need to think about who. Who is this for? Who is your audience? Is it members of the committee? Is it members of the co-op? Is it the general public? Is it for people who are younger people? Is it for older citizens? Is it a real mixture of people? This is absolutely crucial. Who is the audience? Because this will help us to identify who's going to be best placed to write this article. And it will help us to write the article in a way that everybody can understand. You know what? One tip here, and very often, for example, with the co-op stuff, Angelica, we've got a whole broad range of people, including, as you said, people who may well be English, might be their second language, it might be their first, it might be people who don't particularly enjoy reading, or people, you might often have a broad range of people with learning difficulty, people with attention span difficulty, which probably includes me. So, Angelica, so yeah, any thoughts here about this thing, about thinking about who we're writing for? Can you see why this is so important?
Mm-hmm. Also, that's what's the goal?
Absolutely.
Because I find that often in writing, when you read and I think, what do you want, or what is it about? So yep.
That's right. And can you see at the bottom, we won't go, well, at the bottom here, it says exercise. If we had done this in person, we'd have done this. I'd get people into two teams and I'd get them to write down, what do they want as a reader when they're reading things generally? And then what do they want as, what do you want as a writer? So I'm going to invite you to do something for fun, Angelica, whilst I'm talking people from Can you write down just on note paper, what do you, when you're reading something, when you're reading any kind of article, what do you want as a reader? In the meantime, I'm going to talk people through the remaining bullet points here. So whilst Angelica's writing down what she wants as a reader, I'm going to talk through the rest of the bullet points. So we've talked about why are you writing this? What's your goal? We've talked about who you're writing it for. Is it co-op members? Is it members of your committee? Is it the broader public? Is it you're writing to a local councillor, your MP? Are you writing for, what are you writing for? Is it a work article that you're doing? What is it that who is it you're writing for? Also, crucially, what information and what type of report are you writing? Is it news? This is, so something that's news is written in a very factual way. Think about the news. Here are the news headlines. Today, the Prime Minister said X, Y, and Z. So that's very factual, straight to the point. Is it a feature? Now, a feature is something that's far more, it might be that we're doing an article about the chair of the co-op who's now introduced this, or we're now writing a feature about how to get involved in building and getting involved in setting up an allotment. So feature is a bit more light. Are you writing something that's more strategic? You're writing a strategy document? Is it a meeting report? So there's different types of different reports. And in fact, I've got here, whilst Angelica's just typing up this is a completely different type of report. This is a communication survey based on the audit that we did. So this has got lots of stats. It's a different type of report completely. So you can see that some things will be very much news related. Here's a magazine, which is far more feature related. Can you see it's far more soft and light? So features are written in a far more fun way than a news article. So they're written in a slightly different way. So how will you write it? How will you deliver it? And what's the best timing? Now let's go back to Angelica, who's thinking about what she wants as a reader. So what do you want as a reader, Angelica?
I know if it's, let's say, newspaper or even the media as a kind of, I want to get the gist of it very quickly. I mean, the best is already that the very first sentence gives me an idea what it's about. Really, because all this waffle goes on my nerves. And, you know, where by the end of the article, you get a slight idea what it's about.
Right, so first of all, you need to, very quickly, what is it about? You want the gist of it straight away in the first sentence. Lovely. What's next on your list? Brilliant. What's next?
I mean, if it's an informative article or a book, it's like, you know, I need the writing to be in a way that I get involved and interested. If the writing itself is not interesting, I lose it.
Brilliant. So Angelica, picking up on what you've said, one of the basic tenets in writing, when we teach people to write articles, they will say, always with a piece of, with writing, include these: why, the who, why, what, where, and when. So if we're thinking about that, what is this? This, you know, what is it? Why, who, what, where, and when? Because that's what people want to know. What is it? Okay, this is a call out for volunteers. Who? We're calling anybody who's able-bodied, who's got some time. Why? Because we need to make sure that Co-op has now got blah, 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 blah. Where? We need people who can come to the Co-op of service. When? We're doing it next Saturday at 12 o'clock. So making sure that you answer those questions in any article is really useful. What else did you have in your list of any other things that you're wanting, Angelica?
I'd like, since I've become more English or British, is I like it also to have a humorous touch or entertaining, a certain lightness. I like a certain lightness in an article.
This is what you're saying is, Angelica, what you're saying is gold dust, actually, because it's really good to, apart from a very, very heavy news piece, we need your help now. Your country needs you. Please get involved in this. Urgent crisis appeal. We need to provide water pumps for this. Please, can you donate now? You know, that kind of thing. Apart from that, most people are human beings. We want it to be personable. We want it to be warm. So what you're saying here is really nice, so that the reader feels as though they're being spoken to. Absolutely. Anything else that you've got on your list?
Oh gosh, you know, kind of, so in a way, if I read a good article, you know, kind of, I'm learning something. I like to read, and I, you know, kind of, that I gain, you know, kind of some experience or some knowledge.
Magic. What Angelica's saying, everybody who's watching this, what Angelica's saying here is priceless. It's really important. The reader wants to be informed. They want to gain something. They're only going to read something it's interesting to them, it's going to benefit them, it's going to give them more knowledge, more insight, tips, something that they can apply in their life and their work and their career and their relationships. So it needs to be something of interest to them that's going to enrich them in some way, shape, or form, or inspire them, or engage them, or educate them, or urge them, or what have you. Anything else on that list? This is a brilliant list.
Very last, sorry, because, you know, I can go on and on, but it's, what I also like is when I read or hear about something, and it actually stimulates me to do something active.
This is
because you can have writing that is, yes, you stay very passive. Of course, most of it is, but that's brilliant writing when it's like thinking, yeah, I get up and I want to do something.
You know what you've said
Whatever.
there, Angelica, this is why you're the perfect person on this call, because what you've just said, that last bit, that call to action, you said really good writing for you as a reader or what have you, is when something spurs you on to act. Now, interestingly, can you see what in the bit where it says exercise here? The second bit says, as a news provider, what do you want? Now, invariably, if you're writing an article, you're probably wanting the reader to do something. You're either wanting them to get involved, you're wanting them to know. It might even be that the action is for them to be aware of that these are the steps they need to do if they're filling in their rent or what have you. So the action might even be later, further down the road, but there's usually an action that we're wanting. So what, Angelica, what you've said there is really gold dust. So as a news provider, always be thinking, why are you writing this? Who is it for? Why? And crucially, what do you want the reader to do based on this? Otherwise, it's just, what's the point of the exercise? What do you want them to do? Now, what you want them to do, it might just be that they're informed and they feel engaged and so on, but it might be you're wanting them to volunteer, you're wanting them to join a committee, you're wanting them to clean the office after they've used it or what have you. So always be thinking about the call to action. So moving on then, so what you've said is really powerful, Angelica. Really briefly, I'm going to touch on this briefly, but it will help people to kind of really focus when they're writing a report. You've got a number of different types of report. A news report, like we've talked about before. Here is the news. And that's exactly what Angelica was talking about. You want the news very, very quickly. The headlines today are, bam, new news on the number of people out of work. 2, the NHS is now recommending that we do blah, 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 blah. 3, you get the idea. There's news reports. There's committee and organisational reports, which tend to be a bit more dry, isn't there? They're more factual account of what's happened. There's an annual report, which again, often is dry. There's, you've got to have very clear things. Here's the chairman's report. Here's the secretary's report. Here's that, which might have financial papers. You might have a document which is more of a strategy paper. So for example, Angelica might have written a report on how we can all get more involved in our local community. So Angelica's written a report which might say getting involved in communities is really important. There's a number of things that you can do. You can become a member of a co-op, you can volunteer, you can get involved in culture and organisations such as I have in the past, you could get involved in local businesses. And here are some of the strategic action steps around it. So somebody might be writing a strategic paper around something. Or it might be a finance type of report. Angelica, I want to just ask you, is there anything you want to ask about any of these types of report? Because it might just help our viewers.
No, I can't think of anything. I mean, I think it's really nice to, kind of break reports down into, kind of, especially strategy papers sounds interesting. So no, I've no problem.
Well, I think and I'm glad you mentioned the strategy paper. If you find yourself having to write a strategy paper and you've never written a strategy paper before, then it might be good to ask people who've done that before and see how different people lay those things out. So for example, I've had some experience in writing kind of strategic papers. So we would so this is the issue, here's the background, here's the context. This paper sets out A, B, C, and D, and here are our recommendations. So strategic paper should really have the background, the context, a bit of almost like an index of what the paper covers, go by section, and you're wanting key recommendations and actions. That's the important thing about that. A finance report might have financial, it might be a reporting of what's happened over the last year, etc., etc. And my tip for anyone who's newer to these, take a look at different reports and just see how they're written. They all have a slightly different thing. And also what I would say is some people are going to be better at some things than others. This thing that I showed before, there was a report, this communications survey, which is it's a kind of report based on the data of an audit, this is the kind of thing I could never pull together. It's full of pie charts and so on.
Oh,
This is a
God.
very specific type of skill. So we're all going to have different skills here. So don't worry if you feel that one type of report isn't your expertise. We're going to all have different strengths, even within people who write for a living. Your novelist couldn't necessarily write a news report and so on. So here are my top tips as we're beginning to head toward a close when it comes to writing reports. First of all, one, be clear. What's your goal? What's your purpose? Who is the target audience? And therefore, what's the language that you need to use? One of the most useful things I was ever taught in my entire career, Angelica, and everybody who's watching this, I remember being 18 years old when I first started working at Which and Consumers Association. And I was taught, because I worked in this press office where we'd be writing, various articles and so on, and news, press releases and so on, that most newspapers are written for intelligent 12-year-olds. So even your newspapers, it's a brilliant piece of advice, isn't it? Write it as though you're writing it for an intelligent 12-year-old or an elderly aunt. Because what that will mean is that you're writing it in a way that's simple, that anybody can digest. I think it's Einstein who said that if somebody can't explain something simply, then they don't know what they're talking about. And I agree with him. Yeah. So this is really good advice. It will help you as the writer, and it will help the reader. The reader will thank you so much because the reader is busy. So keep it clear, keep it concise. Now this is an interesting one, Angelica, point 2. It needs to be concise, but often it needs to be comprehensive. So, so in other words, a finance report might need to cover all of the things that you've talked about. So my tip here, to be succinct, I'm a big fan of sometimes bullet points. I'm a big fan of writing certain articles that I do in top 10 tips. So depending on what you're writing, here were the main things we covered in our meeting were A, blah, 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 B and C. Another good tip here, depending on what kind of thing you're writing, past, present, future. So in other words, let's say you're writing a report and there's been a lot of detail to it, but you're wanting to keep it simple. Think about, one, what's the past? What's the context and the background? So you might say the background to this particular report is, here is our finance report on how we can move the co-op forward for the next 40 years. The background is that we've been running for 40 years and the main issues have been A, B, and C. That's the past. And what main things we learned was A, B, and C. Then present. Where we are currently is that A, B, and C, we have this number of members, our financial, where we are is this, we paid off our mortgage, and the key things for us to think about are blah, 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 blah. Then finally, future, moving forward, the things we'll need to think about, the environmental impact, how we can be more green, blah, blah, blah. So I think if you can think of anything as past, present, future, thinking about 1, 2, 3, chunking it down, that can really, really help. The background, where we are, moving forward. And the moving forward should include actions, recommendations, what have you. That would be my tip of how you can keep an article concise and yet comprehensive. I also want to point out point 4, and Angelica, you pointed this out. I think you should write something that's compelling. Facts, stats, quotes, funny stories. So often newspaper journals, often the features will begin with things like, let's say they were going to meet some film star. I went to meet this film star and they were lounging in the lobby, and they're written in that lovely way that makes us feel, or something else is written with a quote, a punchy quote. There's lots of different ways to grab attention. Did you know that? Any thoughts there, Angelica, about how we can make stories reader friendly? But this point is really important. It's more easy in certain types of reports than others, but the more we can keep this in mind to try and keep it compelling helps. Any thoughts there, Angelica?
No, I think it's just very inspiring. So no, I wouldn't. I think it's brilliant.
Yeah, so keep that in mind, and also crucially check. If you're using any facts, stats, quotes, sources, research, and spelling, check that. I'll be honest, I'm not the world's best speller. I'm not. So you've got to know when you're writing something what your strengths. Do you need somebody else to proof it? Top tips, where possible, keep it short, sweet and simple and relevant. And remember that you're ultimately writing for the reader, for the audience. You're writing it for the audience. If it doesn't work for the audience, they are not going to read it. They're not going to look at it.
Yeah.
Couple of final tips. So bringing a report to life. So there's a few things to think about. There's the content, there's the design, and there's a house style. If you think about, I'm going to put in front of you, let's talk about, I want to jump, I've talked a lot today about the content, but I want to first of all talk about design first of all. Different magazines or different types of bit of writing will be designed in different ways depending on what you're trying to do. This is the thing about the history of the Windrush. You can see it's designed in a way with lots of personal stories. This is a magazine. It's probably full of, you know, luxury and lifestyle. It's designed in a completely different way. This is a journal written for authors. It's far more factual. It's got lots of words because it's written for authors. So the design is one thing. We've talked a lot about the content, so I don't want to jump too much into that. The last thing about house style is that depending on what you're writing, there might be a particular style. You know, we were talking before about committees, of how that committee might write, or your organization might write, or how you might write. So those are three things to think about. Below I've put, here are some other things that can bring a story to life. Photos, images. You know, like our newsletter, it'd be boring if there weren't pictures to bring it to life. We talked about the facts, quotes, maybe you could include quotes, people's stories, charts, and so on. So just be mindful that there are all sorts of different ways, further references that will bring something to life. Be mindful about copyright and permission with stuff. Ensure that you choose the right kind of images or words or quotes for your audience. Think about, should it be print, should it be electronic? You know, so for example, with our newsletter, we try and do it electronically where we can, via email to save on print and so on. So keep those things in mind. So those are just some pointers there about bringing a document to life. Any thoughts about that, Angelica? But I just wanted to bring that to everybody's attention, just for them to think about. There are all sorts of things you can do to make it more lively.
I need to get a spare piece of paper. That's on my mind, unfortunately. So I don't have anything to go, but I just go and get it.
So I'll recap, just whilst Angelica's getting another piece of paper. So just to recap on this, you know, so there's all sorts of ways to bring anything you're writing to life. You need to think about the content. We've talked a lot about that. We need to think about the design. We need to think about the house style. So the house style is there a house style that you've got to write in that's relevant for your committee or your organization? Because that's going to give you certain confines. We've talked about the content, but then the design is crucial. There's all sorts of different ways of designing something. So interestingly, this survey that we had that Martin, who's in our communications and community subgroup, did was when we did a survey of members, he brought it to life with, you know, because there's a lot of data, putting pie charts in was a way of making complicated data a little bit more straightforward. That's just one way. There's all sorts of different ways in which you can make things more exciting. Pictures, there's so many different things. One thing I'd say here is different people learn in different ways. I'm a big fan of, with anything you're writing, I would always recommend, wherever you can, have a picture with it. Because you're going to get some people who like words, some people like pictures, and some people who are far more what we call kinesthetic. So it's about movement and feeling. So you're wanting to write in a way that's very lively, that speaks to them. So just think about this. And my tip would be, look at how other people who write, look at other magazines and articles. Step back and think, is there a more exciting way, or what would you want that it would excite you as a reader? On that note, very, very quickly, Angelica, again, as a reader, when you see something that comes through your door or an article, what's more likely to catch your eye or make you read it? What for you as a reader is going to make you read it?
Colors. I mean, the design is very important. Mm-hmm. And I react to colors quite strongly, and images.
Isn't that interesting? So these magazines Can you see, isn't it? These people in the magazine industry are so aware of that, the colors and all of that. They know that before you're going to pick it up, it needs to be lively, it needs to be very colorful, it needs to capture your imagination. So imagery, the color is really important. Anything else that's going to make you read it?
And then, you know, the keywords, you know, I don't like it when I immediately see loads of words.
Right, so again, here's an example.
If that's, you know, the cover gives me already an idea really what it's about, I'm likely to go further. And if it doesn't, you know, kind of, then I just throw it away.
So isn't that interesting? Here's a good example of that. So this is a reflexology kind of magazine, and it's very clear, and it says reflexology for pregnancy. So it's clear what it's about, who it's for. Straight away, we know what it is, who it's for. Or this wording here, this happens to be for someone. It says, which brands stand the test of time for the future? So it's very, 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 very clear what it's about. Let's see what this one says. This is it's a conference edition of a magazine. So you're right. We need to think very, very clearly, what is the magazine about? And magazines are good at this, isn't it? They'll often say what's included right at the front. Excellent. So really briefly, because we've touched on this before, when it comes to writing an article, there's this thing which we call an inverted pyramid. Most newspapers are written in this way. You know, when Angelica was saying before, right at the top, the first thing that needs to grab me straight away, newspaper headlines. Newspapers do this. They start off with the top bit. It will have a very quick who, what, where, and when. Prime Minister asks us all to think about how we're going to do blah, 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 blah. Jobless figures go up by 20% or reduced by 10%. So what a newspaper would do, the headline has the key thing straight away. Then the next, and often, so very often the headline will be something that grab our attention. Then the very, very first paragraph, which is the bit in blue here, will sum up the whole thing. So it might well be unemployment surge is there. Unemployment skyrockets as a heading. UK unemployment skyrockets. And then, so that's the heading. And then maybe the next bit in blue, which is the first paragraph, which is the who, why, what, and when. The Office of National Statistics reports that the jobless figures have skyrocketed over the last 10 years, and that's largely due to increases in the number of people, blah, 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 and the economic downturn during the last 12 months. Do you see? If we were to read no further, we would, from that first blue paragraph, know what the entire story is about. And then there might be supporting details. The Chancellor is saying this. You know, the Confederation of British Industry is saying that. Quotes, facts, stories. But that's all supporting information. And then there might be closing details at the end. Yes, there might be supporting details at the end. Now, what's interesting, the most important information needs to be at the top because the audience could stop reading at any point because we're bored or something's distracted them. So, and interestingly, if we were to work in a newspaper office, they say that they cut from the bottom. So editors will cut the stories from the bottom. In other words, therefore, the stuff at the bottom is less important. So anything important needs to be at the top. We're nearly there. So we are nearly there, everybody. If you're writing reports, feature articles, they often lead with a hook. So something to draw people in. Ever wondered how you could blah, 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 blah? You know, they'll start off with something. 9 out of 10 people who blah, 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 blah. So often articles will start off with a hook, then they'll have an introduction, then there's nice clear flowing paragraphs, stats and quotes and so on. So this thing on the right here is a technique that's used in marketing a lot of the time. It's called the AIDA technique. The first thing grabs your attention. And now here's a classic example of, want to save money on your car insurance? Did you know that 5 out of 10 people who did this thing, blah, blah, blah. If you want to know more, then follow this 0800 number. Do you see it does all of those things, attentions. Did you know that blah, 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 blah. If you're interested to find out, want to find out how you too can, and the action. So that is a very, very good approach to draw people to think about, am I using that particular technique? So these are just just certain tips that and tools that you might want to write when you're writing articles. What's going to grab their attention, grab their interest, and make them desire to take action. And think about that action thing. What's the action? So we're asking you to ring this number, call in here, drop us a line, email Angelica, email Rashid, join the maintenance committee. What's the action that you're wanting them to take? We're pretty much there. And in fact, that leads us to any action steps. So we've covered a lot of ground here today. And I want to invite anybody who's watching this to think about, based on this, what action is it? Is it you're going to join a committee? Is it you're going to shadow somebody who's taking part of things? Angelica, I know it's been a roller coaster ride, but any closing thoughts from you? And I know we've covered a lot of work and we put you to the test today.
I'm very much on the spot, aren't I? Yeah. I mean, especially since, you know, we have not managed to do our minutes, you know, kind of the last meeting because of the coronavirus. So not even a very good example.
So I want everyone to think about their actions. Anything that strikes you from, as we wrap up, either any actions that you're wanting to take or any tips that you would share with anyone watching.
I think my action is to persevere with learning to write proper minutes. Because, you know, kind of, I must say I have been struggling at times. So, you know, and kind of with this, it's like, you know, refocusing me. So, you know, I will continue with that.
Brilliant.
Yes, I mean, I can't think of, I mean, it's very comprehensive, I must say, so I appreciate it.
Well, thank you. And I think that my tip again for anyone watching this, so just remember with what we're talking about, with minute taking, you know, get to know the committee, get to know the key people, take things in your stride. Find out, know what all the different headings are, remember to ask questions as you go along, keep it clear, concise, and so on with any type of writing. When it comes to writing articles, think about who you are, what your goal is, what you're trying to achieve, think about who the audience are, and then think about design, content, and delivery, and keeping your audience in mind all the time, and crucially, what the action you're wanting people to take. Angelica, I can't thank you enough for being here on our very first how-to webinar and sharing your warmth and your enthusiasm.
Where are the others?
Where are the others? They're all going to be watching it back, but they're going to all get an opportunity to watch it back. And I'm about to stop the recording so that anybody, let's wave them all goodbye.
Right, yeah, and thank you very much, Rashid.
Thank you very much. Bye, everyone. Actually, just before I do stop the recording, I just want to say with everyone, so these how-tos will be, so we can try and record them all. They're going to be available either on our YouTube channel, and we're going to try and put them also on our website as well, so that people will be able to watch these back. On YouTube, they will be as unlisted, which means that only if you've got the link will you be able to watch them back, so that you can enjoy them and share them with other co-op members to help them. So thanks again, everybody. Thanks for joining in.